Welcome to Flash Fiction 2018 here at the Hoover Library. My name is Anthony, and I lead the Write Club group here, which is the group alongside the library that is presenting this event today. So I hope you will all enjoy this afternoon of poetry and prose, just as the flyer advertised, in case you noticed. This is the 9th annual event brought to you by Write Club and the Hoover Library, but the first to be held in the light of day. Even if we choose to be here in a theater instead of outside. But it sounds better in here than being outside. If you have joined us before, you may have noticed that the name is no longer Flash Fiction Night, as it has been previously. We have dropped the night for obvious reasons and embraced the 4 digits of our calendar year. So we hope that you will find this afternoon in 2018 an agreeable change, and to help ease the transition, we will be plying you afterwards with cookies and coffee, so stick around. Before I introduce our first reader, I'd like to tell you briefly about Write Club and how it has brought us here today. Write Club is an informal gathering that offers an opportunity for burgeoning writers to share a selection from their current endeavors, novels, short stories, memoirs, poetry, plays, scripts, articles, essays. You get the picture. We're pretty open to anyone who has ambitions and aspirations as a writer. They come and share, and this allows them to have feedback from their peers. So we hope that those who choose to come again and again to these meetings will find that the often lonely challenge that it is to write and write well is made easier through fellowship. This is why it is so important that the Write Club instills a friendly and welcome atmosphere for the sharing of works that are very personal to those who have written them. Write Club is also an eager forum for the discussion of different topics concerning the craft of writing. The event is open to everyone, and there's no registration, so if this is the first time you're hearing about it and you have some piece of writing or that novel in the back of your head you've always wanted to write, I encourage you to come. We have sheets outside on the desk that list the dates for the rest of the year, and there's also a sign-up sheet if you're not already on it to receive emails about all future events as they happen. There's also a calendar of all the library's future events out there too, so there's plenty of things for you to take home. Well, I think that's all I have to say, so allow me to introduce our first speaker, and we'll get this show on the road. And to start us off this afternoon is Sean Armand. Sean is a library staff member in the adult fiction department. He has written short stories, poetry, song lyrics, disappointing jokes, and comedy sketches. Over the past 4 years, his blog, A Walk on the Woolly Side, has been visited 165 times by Portugal, sorry. I don't know about Poland. You'll have to... Well, yeah, it's becoming an institution. But please, let's give a warm round of applause for Sean.
Just on behalf of the library staff, thank you all for coming out to the adult programs. It's been really exciting to see the way our department is shifting and becoming more program-driven. And I also want to apologize to our other writers. I have to go back to work as soon as I'm done up here, but thank you so much for getting up and presenting and just for writing. So, about 2 years ago, I started writing this new story called The Wax Buzzard Files as a personal retaliation against writer's block. Just create a character, see what happens, and Detective Nathaniel Guffey kind of took on his own life. So A Game of Chickens is a couple of hours in what I imagine is a regular day in his very interesting life. It was early afternoon at Cafe de All the Good Names Were Taken. Catsy Nomer and I sat on opposite corners of a round table. I still haven't wrapped my head around how we managed that. My lunch date with Miss Nomer went as smoothly as you'd expect. Small talk, breadsticks, a shootout or two. Actually, it was one shootout that got interrupted by the waiter asking us if we wanted ground pepper. It started about the time Mr. Happy's hired thug arrived and ended just before he left. Probably a connection there. I came out unscathed because I spent most of the gunfight in the kitchen complaining about the noise. Miss Nomer survived the old-fashioned way. She didn't get shot. In fact, every stray bullet hit the same patron who luckily turned out to be a pimp with a criminal record and several library fines. That's karma. Although by sheer accident a train killer had become a local hero. I guess even karma has karma. The diner was a mess with broken glass everywhere, but most of that wasn't us, it was just the decor. That was their gimmick. Great food and broken glass everywhere. But at last, with the exception of the staff and 37 customers, she and I were alone. Misnomer, I said, if that is your real name. May I call you Russell? Why Russell? I just wanted to see if you were listening. I took out the card she'd given me and set it on the table next to her, whereupon we got up and moved to that table to look at the card. What is this about? Have you read it yet? I try to avoid reading if I can help it. I read somewhere that you can't believe everything you read. Mr. Guffey, I was hired to steal a priceless diamond. Everything's got a price. Well, this didn't. The price tag had fallen off. Ah, that old story. No price tag, no deal. Did your buyer threaten you? I've never seen a man shake his fist so angrily. Please, detective, he's hired a specialist. Specializing in what? Nothing special. That doesn't sound good. So why come to me? I mean, if there's no price on the diamond, it's not technically theft. You could tell the police you found it while you were trespassing in somebody's house. It's not that simple, detective. Really? It sounds that simple. Well, it isn't. I think it probably is that simple. If it were that simple, I would have done it. I didn't, so it's obviously not that simple. Can we please move on? Have you tried going to the police? I bet if you gave that a shot, you'd see how simple. That's it. She stood up, adjusted her dress, and walked over to the server who had just brought out a plate of spaghetti and 2 salads. She picked up the first salad and threw it on the floor where the bowl smashed into pieces. The second followed suit. All right, you've made your point. It's not that simple. The spaghetti plate went next. Then she broke the serving tray over her knee and threw it at the bottles behind the bar. I said I believe you. You don't have to make a scene. I know. I'm just having fun. She overturned 3 tables before sitting back down. I was getting in over my head. I thought about bailing on her before the waiter brought us the check, but she abruptly stood up and pointed to a booth behind me. Don't look over there. There's a man at that table. What's he doing? Ignoring us. Right. I ran over and grabbed him by the collar. Listen, you, what's the big idea of minding your own business? He whacked me in the head with a rubber chicken going blah, blah, blah. Don't be silly. I asked you a question. I asked you a question, he repeated in a mocking impression of me. Miss Nomer scurried up next to me. Who is he? An irritant. Somebody's toying with us. She looked back and forth between us 19 times. Should we get out of here? Yes, said the entire restaurant. Miss Nomer flipped them off. Come on, I told her. I know a guy who knows a guy. Can he help? Who, the guy or the other guy? Either one. Nope, we're on our own. We pushed our way through the diner, tripping over each other the whole way, made all the more complicated by the fact that I was still holding on to the irritant's collar. Somewhere, somebody had answers. I could only hope that 1, I could find this person. 2, their answers applied to my situation. And 3, actually I miscounted, there were only 2 things. I dropped Miss Nomer off at her house. I think it was her house. It was a house. She got out of the car. Admittedly, I had to force her out, and she chased me down the road for 3.5 miles, but I'm pretty sure it was her house. The irritant made himself at home in the back seat, demanding at regular intervals to know if we were there yet. His name was Joe, although I didn't know it at the time, or now. But he looked like a Joe, or a Marcy. Maybe a Marcy Joe if I had to guess, which fortunately I didn't. I only had to drive and ignore him even as he started kicking the back of my seat. There's an old saying that I can never remember. I only bring it up because it reminds me of something else that I try really hard to forget, which reminds me, never try really hard to forget something. It just makes you think about it more. And speaking of more, you know the kind of people who always want more. We need less of them. And when I say less, I mean fewer in number, and not that I expect them to lose a few pounds. Although, the easiest way to lose a few pounds is to get mugged in London. I've never been to London, but there's this real nutcase in town who kept mugging cameras. We had plenty of evidence against him, but it still took a while to put him away because he kept squirming. Well, I'd obviously taken a wrong turn somewhere. Had to backtrack to figure it out. Let's see. Cameras, mugging, London, pounds, fewer, more, forgetting. That was it. I was forgetting something. The price tag on the diamond. If I find that, I close the case. Everybody goes home happy, assuming they like being at home. Locating missing evidence is never about where to start, but where to end. It's always in the last place you look. The trick is, figure out where you're going to look last and start there. So I guess it is about where to start. I pulled into a seedy service station called Nothing to See Here. Hopped out of the car, which rolled a few more yards before coasting to a rest. "Wait here," I told the irritant, which prompted him to defiantly reach for the door handle. Simon says, "Wait here." That name drop always works. Everything about Nothing to See Here said, "Go away," except for the sign on the door that said, "Nah, just kidding, come on in." I took the sign as an invitation and put it in my pocket. The clear panes on the door had been painted over with translucent nail polish. Someone had tried to obscure the meeting on the other side of the glass, but I could see right through it. There they were, about a dozen of them. I could tell by their suits and briefcases and the PowerPoint presentation that they meant business. Fortunately, I know a thing or two about stuff. I threw the door open, ran inside like somebody who really wanted to be in there, and casually gestured to where I'd left the irritant. "Hey, there's a guy in that car!" 3 of them dove behind the counter, 2 through the window, 1 ran around the aisle screaming and waving his arms a lot, another just started crying where he was. He had to be escorted to the back room by 4 of his buddies to work through some emotional residue. Unless my math is wrong, that left me alone with the ringleader, evening the odds. He glared at me as I sat down, as well as after. "Detective Nathaniel Guffey," I said. "That's my name." I placed Miss Nomer's card on the table, slid it in his direction, tossing it the rest of the way because it was a big table. "I'd like to ask you a few questions. Tell me what you know about the owner of that card." "That wasn't a question," he pointed out observantly. "What can you tell me about the owner of that card?" "Jewel thief. Deal went south over a price tag." "Can you tell me something I don't know?" "Do you know about the pawn shop on East and 7th? "No, I don't." "Well, there is one." I hadn't known that. "Thanks for the tip. You've been very helpful for some reason." By the time I got to the pawn shop, it was a little bit later. I went up to the counter and asked to be shown the finest price tag available. When it didn't answer, I turned my attention to the clerk behind the counter and asked him. Without so much as a word, he explained in great detail how he had nothing to say to me on that subject. I politely asked him to shut up and reminded him for the first time that I wasn't somebody who took no for granted. He reached into his shirt's front pocket, pulled out an unloaded revolver, and threw it at my head. Everything went black due to a power outage. By the time the lights came back on, I was face down on the floor, unconscious, and completely unaware of the terrible things my captor was saying about my mother. I had a dream right then and there that justice would be served, whether I had a hand in it or not.
I hope everyone brought hats and props for their sets, for their readings, because it's necessary now. Next up, we will be having Carole Wilde. Carole is a substitute teacher who has achieved success through a love for her students, a deep well of patience, and a firm tone of voice when necessary. She is always quick to forgive and to forget and to refill her Xanax prescription as needed. So let's all give a warm round of applause to Carole.
Good afternoon. I don't think as you listen to my story, you would actually want my prop here, and I'll explain why. Name of the story is Encroachment. Splat. Rochelle gazed in amazed stupor at the visage that had just appeared on the screen of her brand new to her, candy red yard sale microwave she had purchased just this morning. So intrigued by Rochelle's personality or her outfit or something akin to that, the yard sale family had placed the microwave in the back seat of our expedition and said it was hers for free. Not only was the microwave free, but the cute little boy The son presumably had grabbed her car keys to unlock her SUV, literally throwing the microwave quickly in her back seat. So quickly for a little 7-year-old. This strange family have just weekly workouts like pitching microwaves, pitching mixers, surely not freezers. The small child smiled and waved bye, so long, and mouthing the words, as Rochelle could see in her rearview mirror, akin to, "Get out of here quick, no charge for that thing, just leave." But splat, again, it was a roach on the oven screen with a magnificently oversized face of eyeballs and brown goo from presumably his mouth. It must have come from the popcorn. Surely he did not live in a brand new microwave. Now it appeared to Rochelle that the huge roach was mouthing, "Help me." "It's the new meds the doctor put me on," Rochelle thought. She'd been in a depressive funk since her mom passed, and she had learned herself that she was slowly but surely going blind for no apparent reason. Even the doctors had no idea what was going on. Being the medical student she was, and a good one at that, Rochelle unplugged the oven and took a sleeping pill, or 2.5. Yes, this was a 2.5 pill night. The next morning, the 25-year-old told herself the situation was over. It was just a bad dream. She stumbled sleepily into the living room. Visions of cockroaches had danced in her head. She felt hungover. "Good morning, Rochelle," a voice said from the couch. It was high-pitched and abnormal. "Good morning." "Ah!" was her reply. "My name is Eduardo, and because of your lack of hospitality and no respect for my red castle that I call home, I am now 7 feet tall, weigh 250 pounds, and my shell is really itchy. I think I need a girdle to rein in my new muscle." "Rochelle, you got a girdle that would fit a cockroach?" You are a cockroach, a huge cockroach." "Yep. I saw your face on the microwave last night. That was you." "Yes, Rochelle, but you don't seem to understand the universal sign language for help." Rochelle stopped to take in the beast, legs twitching, eyes like on pointing sticks. And what is that forever stamp on his forehead? "Breakfast was delicious. I licked all of your stamps, but you know, Rochelle, I could use some protein. Let's start this over. My name is Eduardo," as I was saying, "but I wanted to appear very virile and appearing to you, Rochelle, like Edward, the hero you must admire, that perfect male specimen in your Twilight book on the coffee table. But I don't want to be sued for Stephanie Meyer for the name infringement thing, so I'm going to go by Eduardo." The cockroach admitted to speaking in long sentences in a speedy, rambling fashion. You learn to speak fast when a squirt of Raid could end your life. And just as you're about to tell your friends a good joke, your life ends, and your friends never hear the punchline, and boy, are they ticked off. Rochelle was not Catholic, but the idea was forming in her mind to call on some Catholic friends for a possible exorcism of a microwave. She went through her iPhone contacts and found some friends that went to Mass regularly. Surely they must know exorcism protocol for appliances. Too creepy. Rochelle turned that idea down. It won't work. Her friends would just tell her to lay off the margaritas. Besides, Eduardo could move his eyes in a 360 motion normally, and goo came out of his mouth. That was just him. So unlike the girl in the Exorcist movie, Eduardo was just being Eduardo. "I am calling 911 now." Rochelle swiped her phone off the coffee table. "And what will they say?" The cockroach laughed. "They'll send the crazy squad to lock you up." Suddenly, Eduardo began to hum in a high-pitched voice. "Tale as old as time," it sounded like. He began to sway. One of his many legs beckoned Rochelle to join him in a dance. what in the, Rochelle stuttered. Look, let's dance, just like in the movie. The bug swayed here and there. Every time he swayed, a lamp broke and shattered. He wasn't very agile. We'll have Beauty and the Beast right here, Rochelle. Eduardo, you're far uglier than that ponytailed, furry Disney beast. Eduardo stopped. He looked shocked. Who said, I'm going to be the Beast? I am going to be Beauty. That's not fair, Eduardo. Look, I weigh 250 pounds. I don't think you have a right to argue. Rochelle thought, I am going to be Beauty. No, the bug said, I am going to be Beauty. Beauty, Beast, Beauty, Beast. And I'm really going to end this here because right now I think they're still arguing over who's going to be the Beauty and who's going to be the Beast. But I'm sure both of them will work it out somehow.
I think you might want to get in touch with Hollywood because, that Shape of Water movie won Best Picture. And, it seems like, unconventional love stories are really in right now. We need more giant roaches in our life, I feel like. Before we continue, I just wanted to mention one addition to our program today. We will be having at the end one extra reader. It'll be Ronnie Elvis Honkray, and he'll be closing us out that afternoon, so don't run away after Charles reads. All right, so moving right along, our next presenter is Christopher Michael Sudha. Chris is a Birmingham, Alabama resident involved in several music projects, Probably the Tornado, which is an instrumental duo, In Snow, a 4-piece instrumental band, and has 2 solo acts, Love is Light, which is an experimental electronic music act, and Philos Moore, his singer-songwriter persona, which will be performing here at the library on Sunday, May 20th on our plaza. So I encourage you to come. It's a free event as well. He graduated from UAB with a concentration in creative writing. His poetry has been published in dozens of periodicals, and today he will be reading a few poems, both old and new, and a short fiction piece. And also he has 3 poems about to appear in the Weber Literary Journal. So let's all give a warm round of applause to Chris.
Hello, everybody. All right, as I was preparing to decide what I was going to read today, I was going over some past readings I've done and past writings I've done, and always noticed some of always the same themes, mainly because I like dealing with them. But I was trying to think of things that it's always really heavy, serious, always very serious. So I was going to try to find something light. And that doesn't exist. I was looking through everything, and this is just my favorite kind of thing to talk about. So, this first poem is called "Assembling Firewood for Winter." The obvious theme here is a lot of people associate when a special moment happens and passes. Usually, it's just the memory that's foggy, not necessarily exactly how you felt about it at the time. But I think a lot of people sometimes forget about the temperature that's involved in a lot of memory, especially as time passes faster. It seems to pass faster the longer a moment's gone. So there's kind of like this cold tension that's always there. So this poem's called Assembling Firewood for Winter. With the air strung so tight it twangs, goes down so deep you're likely not to relish the rest of it. Bright, cloud-frozen skies blind the sun's weak stabs at sympathy for those living and dying below it. It's too cold to sing, and the song hasn't even begun to play. Inside, the fog about the house twists into branches moaning all night in peace. Our half-frozen garden lies prone, tangled between the hose draped in frosted clay. I look back at our house to meet my sister moving from the window, abandoning her nest. I'm too old to be where I am, Next year, the young are on their own. This next one, it's interesting. One of the poems that's going to be in the literary journal, Anthony mentioned Weber. It's based out of Utah, and I submitted this as a general submission. It wasn't under a theme. Then I found out it was accepted as a theme about the West, and this poem is about 14th Street in Manhattan. I'm not sure. Maybe there's some same kind of cafe there, but this poem's called "Standing at the Gaslight," and it's reference to the Gaslight Cafe that was a very famous music venue back in the day where Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, just about everybody you could think of played in this place and got their start there. The same steps wait, 8 or 9 of them, flowing down deep, meeting 2 barred doors on a day walking west 14th Street. I remember business, not lost, far down an aging block that just went on for miles. How sweat kept warm and fog far from water beyond the Hudson, where we spent hours waiting for distraction. I hear 1,000 voices tasting their cigarettes' ash. I feel your fair nail searching a wrist that makes up our hand. Before beginning to engine on our own accord, together down the mouth toward a narrow sound. This next poem's called Mother's Nursery. I stopped my day to watch her work the ground. Her father's garden formalized the home I'll never know too much about. Her time tended his behind doors made of more than just wood. Grandma always watched through the porch screen. I stopped my day to watch her work the ground. The clay unmasks her hands for me, the air sorting each finger sketched in womanhood. I'll never know too much about her time when she was 24, my age, smoked out by the matter-of-fact tenor in his voice. I stopped my day to watch her work the ground. She's humming now, her lips pursed together as she lures hydrangeas toward the terse clay. I'll never know too much about her time spent waiting to hear good news about each time he slipped past life's cold back and forth. I stopped my day to watch her work the ground. I'll never know too much about her time. And I have a short work-in-progress fiction piece here, just the introduction. And thank you all for listening. All right. The title of this story is called The Heights of a Rebellious House. A house, if you have lived in it for a good while, becomes a sort of laboratory of experimentation. The seasons pass, and one records what they observe. The materials that make up the house build and react upon one another, making the house easily recordable and, in turn, highly sensitive. How to read a house over time with all of its changes is where the trouble is found. For 5 years, I was a house, and all my seasons were recorded very delicately. But with luck, I've had the past 4 seasons to myself. No more medications without my consent. No more lights out whenever I was wide awake. Perhaps that was why I had felt it was time to take away my last season. It's a long ways back home, Ellison. You don't have to explain. If you want, just try to enjoy the ride home. I know I'd like that. Added my father after he helped me out of the chair and into the truck. With one hand, I started to feel above my head for something to hold on to before we began to move, but it was too late. The truck jumped forward off the concrete lot, and soon enough the tires began to kick up dust and gravel throughout the air. I think my father drove that way on purpose, not to show off, but rather to give me a thrill, to distract me. I really wish it could do any of those simple things for me, but it never did. Out of my peripherals, I saw his eyes waiting on mine to cast him an approving look, but I couldn't do it. I was still feeling sick from the medicine they had given me. And if I lost contact with the road in front of us, I would have flooded my father along with the truck's interior with whatever remained inside of my worn-out stomach. I'd rather have him think that I was just being stubborn, not the disenchanted son he had to deal with for the rest of his life. We must have been pushing nearly 50 miles an hour on rock and gravel roads. With some luck, I had managed to keep my composure until he decided to slow down near a general store to give someone a wave. It had been one of our old neighbor's sons, Judah. The Walkers have been our neighbors for about 5 years now, and even though it's been a little while since I've seen Judah, I knew it was him all right. That same half-grin smile I could spot from a mile away that, after meeting eyes with someone he respected, would stretch across his face like railroad ties until that person left his sight. I saw him smile at our truck, but he either didn't recognize me or just had not expected me to be there. Hell, I didn't expect to be there either. "So how long have they had that store?" I added as we gained speed. "Whose store?" "Oh, I guess you remember, Judah," Father said while reaching through his shirt pockets until he found a pack of Marlboro 27s tucked away in one of them. "Yeah, the Walkers had that about 4 years now, pretty much near the time you've been gone. Maybe a little less," he added after popping a cigarette filter between each of his lips and lighting it. I nodded and continued to stare out my window. It only took about an hour's time before the corn had begun to branch out from behind the shallow hills that scattered east and west, beyond the byline stretches of the road we were on. Even through the nicotine and tar smoke from the other side of the truck, I had already felt the scent of Southern Dakota corn rising through each of my nostrils. That clean, purified smell, that damp soil. You can forget what it does to someone when you move out of town, but the moment one returns, so does the memory. "Life's hard, son, I get it," my father said after taking another pull from his now burnt orange filter. A phrase like that is always a good way to start a bad conversation, so I just did my best to stay out of it and nodded in agreement without meeting his eyes. "Don't worry, I don't mean it that way," he said. "Like I said before, you don't have to explain your intentions when you do things like that," my father said while fixing his wrist across the top of the steering wheel and blowing the last of the cigarette smoke out of his window. At that moment, I began to think about my mother and how she would react when I got home, if she would react. "I'll say whatever you want. Just tell me what to say, name it," I replied while reaching for my cigarettes, but forgetting that a nurse must have thrown them out while I was asleep. I saw my father's eyes grow sharper than they had been since we had been in the truck together that evening. His hand went from a very lax position across the steering wheel to a fixed grip around it. I frightened him by telling the truth. That was a mistake. I changed the subject matter. "So how is she?" I said while unbuckling myself as to get more comfortable for the rest of the ride back. The air had grown sharper, more crisp, to the exposed arms that each of us had played out of our windows. "She's changed," he replied without the slightest hesitation. "She wanted to pick you up, but she wasn't well. I told her to rest and wait for me to take you home." The words stripped off his tongue with such absolute smoothness I almost decided to believe what he had just said. That was until I saw him do his old poker tell, rubbing his front teeth and gums with that ashy tongue of his, playing his hand behind the truth that he desperately wanted to exist. Thank you.
Our next reader today will be Pat Temple. Pat loved working as a bilingual education teacher for 4th and 5th graders in a Chicago suburb for many years. When she retired, she moved to Alabama to be near her son and grandchildren. It was a good move. She loves following the weather report for the Great Lakes area in the winter. Alabama suits her to a T. So please welcome Pat to the stage.
A woman in our subdivision turned into a tree, and I, for one, find it disconcerting. I know you could say it was her own fault, like some people do with a shrug of their shoulders, but I say no one is perfect, and most of us, if we got what we had coming, would likely be less than a tree, maybe a weed or a fungus. We have divided into two camps. Our side of the street thinks it's a shame. She really was quite a nice person, might not mean like some people you meet, but the other side likes her better now. They insist she makes a lovely tree. They say they find the change refreshing. I don't even know if she can remember anymore what it was like when she was human. Still, her family takes good care of her. On her birthday, they had a picnic in the backyard, and they gave her an extra dose of fertilizer. And I bet that meant a lot. We argue among ourselves over what kind of tree she is. Our side claims her seeds that spin to the ground on pale green wings are a sure sign she's a maple. Across from us, they think she provides such great shade she must be an oak. There's a biology professor on the end of the block who says she's most likely a sycamore because she requires so much water. His wife, the mother of his 7 children, insists the tree is probably not even thirsty. It's just a trick she plays when she can't fall asleep. I don't know if we should feel sorry for her either. Sometimes life is hard for us humans, and I love to be outdoors. And this spring, a pair of robins built a nest right in the spot where she used to part her hair. You're probably curious to know how this happened, unless, of course, you know someone yourself who turned into a tree, but I doubt it. I've never heard of it before, and surely they would have to put a warning on the fertilizer box if it happened very often. She loved her houseplants. She used to get up before anyone else on Saturday mornings to walk through the house watering them and humming to herself. She got into the habit of using drinking glasses to mix a few grains of fertilizer with the water. It was inevitable that sooner or later she would drink some herself. She turned green gradually, and she was preoccupied with other things. It's understandable that she didn't notice. Then one day while at the mall, 2 women came walking toward her. They looked away, but then snuck a second look just as they passed. It was the second look that caught her attention. After that, she took to wearing dark glasses and a wide-brimmed hat and only going out at night. I do find fault with her beauty salon. When her hair started growing from the tips and not the roots, surely someone there should have told her. One day, quite late, she went out to pick beans in the garden. It hadn't rained in several days, and it was unusually hot. Her little toes dug into the earth like plant roots in search of water. They fastened themselves there, and no one could pull her out. She changed right in the middle of making plans for her daughter's wedding, and only the bridesmaids were left to help with the photographers, the flowers, who would sit at what table at the reception to avoid fights. There's much to do, as you know, if you've ever planned a wedding. The mother of the groom was from out of town. She was quite upset when the tree blossomed right before the wedding, and her son called to say the bride's mother would be wearing pink, when all along they had told her it would be green. She barely had time to get another dress and dye new shoes, but when they met, she was very understanding. They had the wedding in the backyard so the tree could be there. A nice gesture, I think. At first, they even let her stand in the receiving line, but it was just too awkward for people to say things like, "My, how beautiful your daughter looks," or "Your daughter is so lovely," to a tree. When the bride realized this, they moved closer to the porch, and right away, people began complimenting her again. The tree lady's husband has taken up with someone not much older than his daughter. He says, though, he will never remarry while the tree is still alive. The other side of the street, excuse me, admires him for being faithful, but our side wonders if he isn't stalling. If I were the tree, though, I'd be worried. Last night I saw I knew someone coming out of the hardware carrying a long, skinny package. And too bad, you tree lovers, but I think it might have been an axe.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think we probably all know someone in our life who the nicest thing we could probably say about them is that they'd probably make a good tree. Up next, we have Skylar Randall. Originally from Graysville, Alabama, Skylar now resides in McCalla, Alabama, with his wife, Yvette, and their West Highland Terrier, Q. Is it, pronounce it correctly? Is it Q? Okay, Q. I want to get the dog's name right. It's important. Last year, he published his first book, a mystery thriller titled Jacqueline Willoughby. Encouraged by its success and positive reception from readers, he has begun writing the next in the series. Today, he will be reading an excerpt from this follow-up, titled Raina. This story, a prequel to Jacqueline Willoughby, will transport readers back to the early 1940s and tell the tale of Jacqueline's daughter, Raina, and the events which led Jacqueline to pen a book that was later used to facilitate many heinous murders. So please welcome Skylar.
Do you think I'm pretty? Do you like the fragrance of my perfume? Raina would ask of each and every victim, but she cared not for the answers. There was no right answers. Her victim was moments from death either way. Now an excerpt from Jacqueline Willoughby's Raina. As Attorney Jed Murphy awoke, he realized he was outside in an open field. "Where am I?" he asked as he looked around in confusion, shaking off the drug that had sedated him hours earlier. He tried moving his body, but noticed he couldn't move his arms. "Why am I in the ground?" He realized that he was buried past his elbows, close to his shoulders. "Attorney Murphy, how are you?" a voice from behind him asked. "Who is that?" demanded Murphy as he tried desperately to look behind himself but couldn't. As he heard the steps walk around from behind him, he saw the two-tone black and white saddle shoes stop in front of him. He looked up. "Who are you?" he asked. She stood in front of him in a T-shirt layered under a black and white checkered button-down shirt and a pair of loose-fit Levi jeans, with the legs rolled up to just below her knees. A small black comb stuck halfway out of her sock. The person bent down on one knee and said, "I'm Raina." "You defended the animal that killed Nancy Willoughby, Dr. James Posey." She spat on the ground as she stood up straight. "Attorney Murphy, do you know why you are here?" "How did I get here?" "As an attorney, you should know you never answer a question with a question," replied Raina. As Murphy looked around, wondering what was going on, he said, "That guy last night must have put something in my drink." He paused for a moment. "I don't know how I got here, but go get help now." "I am your help counselor," said Raina with a light smirk. "I'm going to release you as soon as we finish talking." "Get me out of this hole, girl. Stop playing games with me and help me out of here now," yelled Murphy, rage steaming across his face. "You said games? Let's play a game." Raina knelt down on one knee about 6 feet away from Murphy, then drew a 2-foot-wide circle on the ground with her finger. She pulled 7 marbles out of her pocket and placed 5 of them in the circle. She placed one of the 2 larger marbles in front of Murphy and moved back a couple of feet. "You ever played marbles, counselor?" "What do you mean? Get me out of this hole now," he screamed. "Do you know who I am? I have pull in this city. I will have you locked up and the key thrown away if you don't get me out of here." Raina stood up and walked behind him. She picked up a roll of duct tape, tore off an 8-inch strip, and bent down in front of him. "You're like some lawyers I've been around. Just can't keep that flap you called a mouth shut." She put the tape across his lips. "Now we can concentrate on this game of marbles." Raina walked back to the marbles, knelt down outside the ring, and flicked the shooter marble out of her fist with her thumb. She hit 2 of the marbles out of the ring. With each shot, she moved around the circle, knelt down, shot, and knocked out a marble. After 4 shots, all 5 marbles were outside of the circle. Raina walked around and picked up all 5 marbles. Not bad for a 20-year-old girl who hasn't shot marbles in a few years, huh, counselor? Attorney Murphy's face was red, his veins standing out of his neck and forehead from the built-up anger and his inability to speak. Raina walked over and picked up the shoot of marble in front of Murphy. "You won't be needing this," she said as she placed all 7 marbles back in her pants pocket. "Now, back to business. Attorney Murphy, you are here today because you assisted in freeing a known rapist and murderer," said Raina. "You are sworn to uphold justice in the courtroom, but you chose to lie, cheat, disgrace reputations and honor, and make a mockery of the judicial system. When I heard Judge Roberts had died, I thought, you know who would be a better candidate to fill in his grave? You, Attorney Murphy." Raina knelt down on one knee, smiled, and asked, "Attorney Murphy, do you think I'm pretty?" Murphy moaned and shook his head in anger. "I take that as a yes," said Raina as she blushed. She leaned forward, placing her face near the side of his, and asked, "Do you like the fragrance of my perfume?" Murphy moaned loudly, trying to scream, his face red as a pepper. "I take that as a yes, too," said Raina. She stood up and said, "It's time for your punishment, Attorney Murphy. I told you I was going to release you from this life." Raina walked over to a pile of white stone gravel rocks as big as baseballs, about 10 feet away. "Attorney Murphy, have you ever heard of lapidation or stoning? In case you don't know, it's a practice of capital punishment whereby a group throws stones at a person until they die. The reason it's done in a group is so no one individual in the group can be singled out as the one who kills the subject." Raina bounced one of the rocks in her hand, looked around. "No group here, so I guess I'll be the individual who kills the subject." Murphy moaned and shook his head frantically as tears ran down his face. "Attorney Murphy, I would suggest you close your eyes and say a prayer, because this is going to hurt. I'll give you a moment." Raina bowed her head for a few seconds. "Okay, showtime." Raina reached around her back and pulled out an old, worn Barron's baseball cap and put it on her head. She took the first gravel rock, wound up like a pitcher, and threw it. It hit the side of the attorney's face hard, and he moaned in pain. The second rock hit him in the nose, causing blood to come rushing down over the tape across his lips. The third rock hit his forehead. The fourth rock hit his mouth. Raina threw the sharp-edged gravel rocks one after another as hard as she could, each one landing against the face and head of the attorney until he was almost unconscious. After Raina threw the 15th rock, she just stood there, looking at him. Then she took the baseball cap off and placed it back in her pants pocket. She used the sleeve of her shirt to wipe the sweat off her forehead, then reached down to get her comb out of her sock. She took a moment to comb her hair back in place, put the comb back in her sock once she'd finished. She walked up to the badly bruised and bloody attorney and said, "You, along with the others, killed my mother. The stoning was for my satisfaction. The game of marbles, just a spectacle. But this bullet to your head is for her." Raina reached around and pulled the Derringer pistol out of her back pocket. She put it against the top of the attorney's head, closed her eyes, and pulled the trigger.
One of the things I always like to tell people when, they bring in works that they're reading from scenes is that, a lot of times very small details add a lot to a scene. And one of the things I really liked was the comb in the sock. It was a nice little physical detail that, to me, things like that can bring a scene to life more than a lot of things. And Christopher had a nice one earlier, too, with the father's tongue. The poker tell. It's those are nice details, and it's always a treat to get to hear someone like that. Well, you can also, if you're interested in reading Jacqueline Willoughby, you You can speak to him during our cookie and coffee reception, and he can tell you where to go online to read it. So next up, we will be having Michael Verga. He is a BA in English from Birmingham Southern College. He's been at poetry circa 1987, but poetry has been with him since the start of his heart. As a cyber bohemian of faith committed to creativity, he's a conduit for poems of various shapes and sizes, contributing online and in print when accepted or recognized. As a teacher, he has conducted poetry workshops throughout the past 2 decades. He has also served as a touring docket for the BMA, incorporating poetry when possible. So please welcome Michael.
Good afternoon. The last couple of times it was the evening, and we've moved it to the afternoon. Since this is a library event, I'm going to present 2 haiku that placed second, one in 2015, one in 2016, in a statewide haiku competition sponsored by the Birmingham Public Library in conjunction with the Japanese American Society of Alabama as part of the annual Sakura Festival, which was last Saturday for this year, and juried by members of the Southeast chapter of the Haiku Society of America. I then noticed that the 2 red ribbon haiku had a dialogue between them, and they now, soon after, in 2016, April of 2016, I put them together as a diptych, and they now have a home in the Birmingham Arts Journal, April 2016. I mentioned that the month because April is National Poetry Month, so that was also very exciting to me that they had a home at National Poetry Month 2016. I put them in a diptych where the west screen is the sunset, that's the temporal, and the east is the sunrise, the eternal. The west screen, slowing Niagara Falls down to a freeze frame, slowing Niagara Falls down to a freeze frame. And on the east screen, the face lifted from the clock. The face lifted from the clock. Ekphrasis is the creative process of when one creativity prompts another creativity in a different medium. In particular here, a canvas by Norman Rockwell prompted a poem, and then I extracted from that poem a cameo micro-poem. Then there was a call for ekphrastic poetry for an anthology, Ekphrasia Gone Wild from Ain't Got No Press. This was released in July of 2013, and I appear on page 66. Wonder Worker, after Norman Rockwell's canvas of The Day After Christmas, December 26. On the canvas, you'll see the calendar with December 26. Santa Claus is napping away in a rocking chair in heavenly peace. And what really caught my attention was the empty sack there laying at the foot of the rocker. Wonder Worker. Santa's sack emptied. Now he's sacked out, spent on childhood. The law without a buy. Another form that I write in is a Sinkane, which is 5 lines, and I have had in the past years several of those featured in a magazine called Amaze, M-A-Z-E, the Sinkane Haiku, Sinkane Journal, and Sinkane, C-I-N-Q-U-A-I-N, Sinkane. It was actually originated by an American woman named Adelaide Crasby, and her signature Sinkane was called, is known as Amaze, and hence the name of the magazine journal. Online, you can find it at amaze-sinkane.com. Venice, Botticelli's birth of Venice, Primavera. Venice, the veiled city rises nude from the sea, and the people there wake to walk on water. Did you mention in the, I don't know if it was mentioned in the intro, that Michael, son of Virginia Ruth, if it was, and if someone might be wondering about that, back to a few haiku in regards to that will explain that epithet. How can son be ruthless? Mother was given the middle name, Ruth. I continue on as her strong torch song. Her joy continues to rhythm and rhyme with her boy. Back to some Sinkane. March is National Women's Month, and literary history. And I've put together a volume. There's 3 of them. I call them a volume because it's based on a novel. Bronte on the Rocks. Strong will, winds, rains, moors, crags. Definitive high rock opera before the art went high tech. Bronte, beyond the book. In creating Heathcliff, Emily's reincarnated herself. Bronte lifting the veil. In creating Kathy, Emily's imagined herself with words. Revival, another Sinkane. Brother saved from the box, vision beyond telly, evangelistic, powered on, nonstop. Petty, he's not petty. Unfussy rocker, unpretty voice, unpettied, just Tom Petty. And someone else in his field, a friend of his, I think you might recognize this, and I'll give you the title. This is another Sinkane. Chantress, ageless, sauntress, laced in lyrics, drifting in place, center stage, sister of the moon. And that was featured in 2003 in the Sinkane Journal. Stevie Nicks at 55. I'm real fascinated by the veil of Veronica. The face, still the face, God incarnate, still breathing from the veil, the woman screams. Never a shroud for her. And I'll close with a few more haiku. Hospice beds, launching pads for the miracle lift. Didn't know she was going in for the miracle lift. The joy of Joan Rivers. Flat lines aren't finishing lines. Flat lines aren't finishing lines. Life exhumed with the light. Life exhumed with the light. Thank you.
Another thing that I'm very much a fan of is a very good use of alliteration. And in particular, Michael, was to wake, to walk on water. That's really nice. Next up, we'll be having, and this is not the last one, we have one more, is Charles Smith. Hailing from Montgomery, Alabama, Charles is a retired advertising executive and graduate of Auburn University. He was an athlete through high school and college and is a two-time state champion pole vaulter. He is now finishing up his 5th book, Last Vision, the conclusion of his Jack Slade trilogy. Today, he will be reading from his 3rd book, Jack Slade and the Unreliable Witness, the first novel in his aforementioned trilogy. So please, welcome Charles.
I have 4 props. It's the 4 books I have published. The first one is The Falcon Force. It's about a New Orleans detective that gets drafted into a top secret CIA task force. You can find all of these on Amazon.com. My second book is Command Plan. It's about it's about a Chicago Vice Squad super cop. My third book that I will be reading from is the first book of a trilogy, Jack Slade and the Unreliable Witness. My fourth published book is Jack Slade, the Psychic Detective, and it's book 2 of the trilogy. I'm working on book 3 now and hope to finish it soon. I will read from Jack Slade and the Unreliable Witness, book 1 of the trilogy. The blurb on the back reads, Lieutenant Jack Slade, a detective for the Las Vegas Police Department, with only 6 months' experience as the department's lead homicide detective, finds himself charged with solving his first drive-by shooting murder. A popular radio personality has been brutally gunned down on the Las Vegas Strip, leaving virtually no clues, and the only witness Slade has seems to be unreliable. The crime mysteriously and tragically leads to more deaths. He teams up with an ex-jock, Turner Blakeney, a rookie detective who uses the techniques of Sherlock Holmes, and with the media nipping at their heels, they attempt to solve the near unsolvable crime. Their investigation leads them all the way to the Adirondacks in upstate New York, where they join with the NYPD in a dangerous mission designed to capture their number 1 suspect. On the rebound from an unpleasant divorce, Lieutenant Slade stumbles into a love-hate relationship with his assistant, Sergeant Lucy Bryant. It complicates his life and leads to a day of decision. Jack Slade and the Unreliable Witness is a thriller that's a masterful blend of dialogue and suspense. Chapter 1. He looks down upon a fantasy world with the Eiffel Tower, a castle, the Statue of Liberty, the canals of Venice, pirate ships, a hot air balloon, and a volcano all within view. It's 3 a.m., and Royce is testing his new telescope. Suffering from insomnia, he decides it's a good time to try it out. There's no moon in sight, so he picks out a star and zooms in on it. He marvels at how the tiny flickering speck of light takes on the form of a tiny little round planet. He's not sure if it's Mars or what. He'll have to get some books on the subject to assist with his new hobby. Before him on the ground, he sees a bright flash of light, and he directs the telescope towards it. and begins to focus on the erupting volcano in front of the Mirage Hotel and Casino. It's a brilliant array of colors, red, orange, and yellow, as the flames shoot high in the sky. He scans the small crowd that's gathered in front of the volcano as it erupts. From his 17th floor luxury condo, he has an excellent view of the volcano and most of the Las Vegas Strip, 4 miles of high-rise hotels and casinos. Although the volcano is nearly half a mile away, he's able to bring it up close, and he's amazed by the power of the telescope. He adjusts the scope to an even stronger magnification, and when he has the scene in focus, he notices something startling. It appears that someone is pointing a gun from the window of a black stretch limo as it passes by the crowd at the volcano. Then he sees a puff of smoke, and he knows that it was what he thought it was. He tries to get a look at the license plate, but the telescope's not strong enough to bring it into focus. He's not sure, but he believes that the tag is yellow and blue. Royce redirects his attention to the small crowd, and he sees a figure lying on the pavement with the crowd gathering around it. He can't tell if it's a man or a woman. All he knows is he just witnessed someone being shot. For a second or two, Sandy can't tell what's happening. An excruciating pain grabs her back, and she can tell that something has struck her in the back. A frightening thought. She's been shot. Who would do that? Her whole life begins to flash before her as a tremendous weakness comes over her, and her vision blurs. She falls to one knee and then collapses prostrate upon her face. She feels a cold rush like ice water cascading through her veins. All she can see through a dense fog is legs and feet surrounding her. She's aware that she's paralyzed and she can't move a muscle. She hears screams and the sounds of feet shuffling around, and she tries to cry out for help, but she can't make a sound. Judy Smith has just started her break. She's eating a snack from the vending machine and sipping coffee in the break room. She's all alone in the break room, and her thoughts have strayed to her plans for tomorrow, her day off. Then she hears the signal, 2 long rings that eerily reverberate throughout the emergency room. With several years of experience as an emergency room nurse, she knows exactly what it means, an incoming trauma patient. Her adrenaline begins to flow, and she leaves everything and rushes down the hall and out to greet the ambulance, along with a doctor and 2 more nurses. When the ambulance comes to a stop, the ambulance attendants quickly remove the patient from the ambulance. Judy can tell from the patient's blouse that she's losing a lot of blood. Instinctively, Judy grabs the air bulb of the resuscitator that's keeping the patient breathing from the attendant to free him up to help maneuver the patient into the hospital. Judy keeps pumping the bulb all the way into the trauma room. The ambulance driver says, "It's a gunshot wound." 3 nurses and a doctor quickly lift the patient onto the trauma room bed. A nurse hangs the patient's IV bag upon the hook above the bed and checks it to be sure the glucose is flowing into the patient's veins. Judy keeps pumping the resuscitator, but she can't see any sign of life. Another nurse takes a pair of surgical scissors and quickly cuts loose the patient's blouse and bra to expose her upper body, and skillfully applies electrodes on the patient's chest to monitor her heart, and they all look hopefully at the monitor. There is a faint heartbeat. Dr. Rivera replaces the air bulb device with a breathing machine face mask, and the machine begins to pump life-saving oxygen into the patient's lungs. The doctor can tell that the patient is drowning in her own blood, so he performs a tracheotomy and removes the mask and inserts a tube from the breathing machine down her throat. It jars her whole body each time it pumps. For a few seconds, the monitor shows improvement on the heartbeats. Then the monitor begins to squeal and displays a straight line. Her heart has stopped. A nurse grabs a defibrillator from the wall and hands it to the doctor. He jolts the patient several times with it and then finally says, as a matter of fact, "She's lost too much blood." He repeatedly attempts to revive her heart, to no avail. He doesn't see a wound on her chest, so he hands the defibrillator to a nurse and leads the victim to one side to see where the blood is coming from. One look tells him that a bullet has probably penetrated her heart, and he knows it's hopeless. He lays her gently back down, motions the nurse to cover her up with a sheet, then announces to no one in particular, DOA. He rips his bloody surgical gloves off and slings them angrily across the room towards a trash container. Neither one hits its mark. He looks at Judy and says, "Wheel her down to X-ray. I want some shots so I can do my report." Then he storms out with his thoughts questioning why he ever decided to be a doctor. Dr. Rivera, the son of a wealthy Mexican family, had envisioned himself as becoming a doctor who administers medicines to save lives, not trying to bring people back from the dead. Judy Smith, still standing by the patient holding the resuscitator, finds herself fighting back tears for a lady she's never even met. I have a few copies of this Jack Slade and Unreliable Witness if anybody's interested to see me afterwards. They're $15 each. That's it.
Okay. And last, but certainly not least, is Ronnie Elvis Honkray. And so please, everybody, welcome Ronnie.
Hello. I just moved here to Birmingham from Mobile, and so I'm new to the group and to the area. I want to thank the Wright Club for giving me some pointers on one of the stories that I read earlier, and my wife for using her red pen very liberally, but that's great. That's great. I play a lot of D&D since a kid, so a lot of the stuff I do, I think this is kind of fun. Let's make a story out of it. So over the past 5 years or so, I've been doing a few short stories, and this is a excerpt from one of the campaigns I did a few years ago. Winifred rode with her party through the old town of London, where the streets were dirty and most of the wooden buildings were very aged. They looked as if the layers of dirt were the only things keeping them together. She noticed the people looked much the same, wearing clothes of more soiled rags than actual fabric, which made them look just plain dirty. When someone came from either out of town or from one of the nicer areas, they stood out like a jewel in a bag of dull rocks. Approaching the bridge, they turned off the main road to the bank of the river, where most of the buildings were remnants of a past fire. At the end of the row sat a little two-story shop with dirty windows and a sign behind the main glass that Winifred could make out to say, "Potions, incantations, minerals, and sorcery." They all pulled up and got off their horses and hitched them to the ruins of a saloon. Some of them started towards the door of the shop while the others stayed put. Winifred noticed the old knight that led this pack of adventurers waiting at the door till everybody was done. In a gruff voice, he said, "Don't touch anything. I'm not sure what all he has in this shop, and I'm not planning on losing anyone before we even get started. So keep your hands to yourself." With that, he opens the door, and the stale smell of old books and barn dirt comes out of the doorway. Winifred has no problem looking through the dim light coming through the dirty window. It was more than enough for her to see clearly with her elfin eyes. Inside, there were rows of shelves piled high to the ceiling, and up both sides walls, also filled with books and assorted items. As they walked down one of the aisles towards a light at the back, she heard the old knight at the head of the line say, This stuff is mostly broken junk and trash. But some of this is dangerous, so just follow me to the back. Winifred followed her group while looking at the shelves as she passed. To her, it looked like things people leave on the side of the road in discarded trash. Halfway down the aisle, she got a bit lost in her head, filtering out items and picking out things that she recognized. A bracket off an old plow for sowing a field, a broken shovel, and bricks with paint marks on them. It made her wonder if this stuff was for sale, and if so, who would buy these? Now stopped and forgetting what the knight said, Winifred runs her finger across the spade of a broken shovel and sees a glint of light behind it. She slowly reaches up to pick up the shovel, and as she does, the light from the dirty windows starts to form a shape. "It's a bell," she whispers. She realizes that she is now holding the shovel with nowhere to put it down. She looks around for an empty space. Noticing that nobody is paying attention to her, Winifred quickly puts the shovel on the ground. She stands back up and slowly reaches out to the bell. Just a finger is placed on it, and she feels cold metal under her touch. It's shiny, not old and dusty like everything else around it. The bell is small enough for her to pick up, but not without a bit of effort. Now, using both hands, she takes her fingertips and runs them across the lettering, trying to make out the words on it. As Winifred turns the bell, she gets a better grip on it and starts to pick it up a little bit, trying to read what's on the side, and starts to whisper, Hermes. As she speaks, she feels the bell start to chill just a bit. Hermes, Titan. Without a warning, a freezing shock jolts up her fingers. At the same time, in her head, she hears screaming, rushing water, and a deep sound that keeps repeating over and over again like a warning. Behind it all, she can make out a violin playing in the distance. Winifred's emotions are stolen from her as she feels a great sense of loss and fright at the same time, making tears build up in her eyes. She slams her eyelids shut, but in her mind, she sees herself standing on a large ship in the dead of night with people dressed in strange clothing running all around her, crying with the twist of desperation on their faces. The ship starts to tilt, and she feels herself sliding down a wooden deck, then hitting the water with an unexpected blast of cold that bites her to the bone. The bell slips from her wet fingers and rings as it lands back down on the shelf. As it rings, she opens her eyes and steps back startled, but not as startled as when she realizes that she's tripped on the broken shovel she placed on the ground. Winifred lets out a little yelp and then falls back onto the shelf behind her. She makes more noise as pots and pans fall from the shelf and hit the floor around her. A metal disc with a galloping horse on it hits her head, then hits the floor and rolls around and around, going faster and faster till with a deafening roar, it stops. Quietly, Winifred looks up and sees that the entire party has turned to stare at her. The old knight looks at her through slits under his eyelids as she hears his words from before echo in her mind. Don't touch anything. From behind the group, a wet voice full of phlegm says, I wouldn't touch that again. Last time she rang, too many people died. Yes, too many. If you knew from which depth she came, you might need to hold your breath. The voice started to giggle, a wet giggle, thick like snot that turned into a bit of laughter and then a coughing hack. As Winifred starts to get up, she begins to speak so she can apologize, but then the creature who spoke comes around the party. What Winifred saw was the most disgusting thing she had seen in her life. He, if it was a he, stood on scrawny green legs wearing tattered clothes, was, well, a frog. A frogman, maybe. His skin was dark green with black spots and entirely covered in slime. She could barely look into his eyes, those giant bulbous eyes that moved in two directions at once, on a head covered with more spots than what seemed to be long white greasy hair and big red puffy lips that stretched to a goriest of smiles. The old knight broke her out of her stare as he spoke. Perhaps it's best if you wait outside with the others. Winifred looks at the knight and back at the frogman stood up. No, she says, I want to be here. Thank you.
Let's give all of our readers one more round of applause.